That's, for me, the biggest, most transformational conspiracy, that the world is a metaphysical place. And what brought me to that was this, or led up to that, was this study of conspiracy and the heightened fear that went along with that. And I'll share some specific information, even though I don't feel like the specific information is the most important part anymore for me. But I had looked at documents from what I believe were called the DIA 6 release in the early 2000s. And one of the documents was a briefing to President Reagan. And I liked it. I don't know. I resonated with it. It seemed to be, as the story goes, it was a former intelligence person who had started an email chain, and the document was released to him, and then he redacted it to remove the names of the living. So I shared that report with my dad. I'd driven to Kansas City, and on the way back to Columbia, I was meeting some friends at a restaurant. I was going direct to the restaurant, and when I met with my dad, I requested that he and I both turn off our phones and leave our phones behind in the house, in the room where we were. And, many of us know now that that may have been a perfectly logical, reasonable thing to do. But at the time, I did it partly because I felt I was in a kind of a paranoid state. And this story is, in that consciousness. I will share other stories in other states of consciousness and faith, and much more heart-centered. But this story comes from a paranoid state of consciousness. So he and I left our phones. He indulged me. We left our phones. We went for a walk. Talked about it out on the street. And when I drove back to Columbia, and I met my friends at this restaurant, I noticed shortly after I parked and I was walking into the restaurant, there was a blue sedan, something like a Chevy Lumina or something, that had parked, and it didn't have government plates or anything. And the gentleman got out, and he just seemed very kind of average. Nothing particularly stood out. He was wearing a kind of like a dark colored polo shirt and had pretty clean haircut, kind of maybe caramel hair or something like that. This gentleman, I just want to say, could have been nobody, could have been nothing, could have been zero coincidence whatsoever. All right, but being in this paranoid state just caused me to pay attention to certain things, certain details. And so I noticed that he sat alone directly across from me. I was sitting with my back to the front window, and he sat down by himself near the entrance to the restroom, in the back of the restaurant. And, I stayed there for a while. I noticed he sat alone, ordered a meal, ordered one drink, and, just seemed to be a little more serious. There was something about it, and I don't know if he and I made eye contact a couple of times, which, of course, if you are staring at somebody, that there is something, a conscious acknowledgement. If we look at somebody, we stare at somebody, a jogger on the street. There's a very interesting and fun experiment that you can do, is just put your attention when you pass by somebody in another vehicle, in traffic at a stoplight, how often does it happen when you turn over to look at somebody that they then turn to look at you? When you look at a jogger or somebody on the street, how often does it happen that they turn and look at you? Because there is some kind of conscious connection that is happening. Something in you is, I want to say, reaching out. I don't know if that's accurate, and acknowledging something in them, even if they are not presently aware of it. Uh, okay, so I had that experience, and I just remember thinking it was very odd. I thought at the time that it could have been some kind of undercover, government person. Moving on, that was not the height of my paranoia and insecurity, not by a long shot. And I want to say it was maybe leading up to that kind of New Year's time period, as I just kind of went deeper and deeper, read more, exposed myself to more stories, and my fear, really kind of heightened. I got to the point where I was very paranoid. It's possible on just kind of a simple logical plane that my internet search history or activity could have maybe set off some red flags somewhere. I mean, I don't know, but it was hot. I was going through a lot of data, a lot of information. And at one point, I thought that I thought my family was going to have me committed. There for a time, a few days or something. I really thought that was highly likely that I was just going to be at home, and all of a sudden, a van and white coats, would come out with restraints and just kind of abduct me, and I really, really thought I was going to be taken away and restrained. I'd read all, these things about these uh, what are they called? These silent, helicopters, some kind of stealth helicopter or something. And and then I'm like looking out the windows and looking at the sky. Um, Anytime I thought I heard something fly over, um, to see what it could have been. So what I started to examine, this is what I feel like is a more important part of the story. What I started to examine was my own fear. And watching there was at the time a YouTube of something like 20 videos, this very long interview with Tom Campbell and all these segments. And that was part of what helped me to do this self-analysis. I just started to look at how it is that, studying or reading certain information sets or subsets was somehow also causing me so much fear. And so even the way I phrase that right now, how is the information causing the fear? As if I'm blaming the information for the fear. Nothing was fundamentally different in my reality. I mean, I was inviting all of this information into myself. I was reading it, I was studying it, I was watching the content. So it just seemed to occur to me one day that maybe there's something that I was also doing if I'm inviting the information. And one of the things that Tom Campbell has said is everything is information. Like everything is just information. Okay, and I'm not going to debate the truth or what have you in that. But that is one of the key phrases that I recall kind of hooking onto, is thinking like, okay, if everything is just information, then there is something about the process of how I process the information as I am inviting it, as I am, bringing it into my being. There is something that I am doing. There's some way that I am sorting it, or kind of ranking it, or determining, need to feel fear around what I don't. It was an unconscious process. I like to develop kind of a lot of metaphors, analogies, and just kind of symbols, pictures, and things that just kind of help me rationalize or kind of make sense of spiritual or metaphysical things that kind of come through my own experience. So one of the things that kind of occurred to me was like the I think it's the album cover of a Pink Floyd, where it shows the prism picture of all the light coming in, and then the prism, and it all divides into the different colors. And that's one of the things that I kind of felt like was happening, was I'm the one taking in this information, and then there's something in me or about the way that I am processing, or integrating, or whatever kind of terms you want to use, the information, that I was linking the fear to the information, right? And so what that helped me do is start to turn my attention. And it was very subtle at first. It was a almost, at the time I would have said almost insignificant, but it felt like a very subtle, very small shift of awareness. So this is not the, what I called before, the full kind of acute shift in consciousness. This was a very insight, just a very small insight. It felt very normal. Realization. I mean, it felt inspirational, but regardless, just the realization that I'm doing this, right? So it was the beginning of taking responsibility, and maybe that's a better word, or a better way to describe it. It was kind of the very, very beginning of me taking responsibility for how I processed the information that I took in. And that will conclude part 2. We'll have to pick up in third part. Thank you very much.